Rain crashed down in relentless sheets, blurring the streetlights and turning the quiet suburban road into a river of reflections. Water splashed against cracked sidewalks, gutters overflowed, and thunder rolled low across the sky like a warning. Inside a faded blue sedan, a single mother gripped the steering wheel, her shoulders aching after a double shift that had drained every ounce of strength she had left. Her uniform was still damp from earlier spills, and her mind raced faster than the windshield wipers. Rent was overdue. The electricity bill sat unopened on the passenger seat. Her 7-year-old child was home with a neighbor, waiting for her return, probably peeking through the curtains every few minutes. As she slowed at an intersection, her headlights caught the fragile figure of an elderly man walking alone in the storm. He leaned heavily on a thin cane, each step uncertain, his coat soaked through and clinging to his frail frame. Cars rushed past him, tires spraying water without hesitation. No one rolled down a window. No one paused. She tightened her grip on the wheel. She didn't have time. Gas was low. She was already late. But then she saw his trembling hands and the way he fought to keep moving against the wind. Something inside her refused to look away. Before she could talk herself out of it, she pulled over and rolled down her window. "Get in, let me take you home." The old man lifted his eyes to hers, deep, tired, and shining with quiet gratitude. She had no idea this small act of kindness would change her life forever. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, 32 years old, though the weight she carried made her seem older on most days. Life had not unfolded the way she once imagined. 5 years earlier, she had stood beside her husband in a small church, believing in forever. But forever ended abruptly when a late-night phone call shattered her world. A highway accident. A rain-slicked road. A husband who never came home. Since then, it had been just her and her 7-year-old son, Liam, against a world that rarely slowed down for grief. Sarah worked mornings at a diner off the interstate, pouring coffee with a tired smile, and evenings stocking shelves at a grocery store. Between shifts, she rushed home to help with homework, pack lunches, and pretend she wasn't calculating every dollar in her head. Eviction notices had begun arriving 2 months ago, folded sharply and slipped under her door like quiet threats. She hid them in a kitchen drawer, behind takeout menus and old coupons, telling herself she would figure it out soon. Her car, the same faded blue sedan she'd driven for years, rattled when it started and groaned on steep hills. She prayed over it every morning, whispering, "Just one more day," as if the engine could hear her. Yet no matter how tight things became, she never let Liam feel the bitterness of their struggle. When he asked why she shared their last umbrella with a neighbor last week, she simply smiled and said, "Because we have enough to share." She taught him to hold doors open, to say thank you, to offer help even when no one was watching. Sometimes she remembered her father, a mechanic with rough hands and a soft heart. Once, when she was little, he had stopped in the middle of dinner to fix a stranger's flat tire in the snow. "Kindness," he'd told her afterward, brushing frost from his jacket, "is the one thing you can give that never leaves you empty." She held on to that belief fiercely. Even when life wasn't kind to her, she chose to be kind anyway. She gives when she has nothing to give. Up close, the old man looked even more fragile than he had beneath the streetlights. His coat was worn at the cuffs, the fabric thin and shiny from years of use, yet carefully buttoned as if dignity mattered more than comfort. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat, sliding down a face lined with deep, thoughtful wrinkles. His shoes caught her attention most. Old leather, slightly cracked, but polished to a quiet shine, as though he still believed in presenting himself properly to the world. When he settled carefully into the passenger seat, he held his cane upright between his knees. "You're very kind," he said softly, his voice gentle and measured. "But I don't wish to trouble you. I can manage." "It's no trouble," Sarah replied firmly, adjusting the heater toward him. "No one should be walking in this." He nodded, studying her for a moment before giving a small, accepting smile. As they drove, rain tapping steadily against the windshield, he asked simple questions: her name, whether she lived nearby, if she had family. His tone was polite, never prying, yet attentive. She kept her answers light. "Just me and my son," she said, forcing a small laugh. "We manage." She didn't mention the eviction notices or the exhaustion that lived in her bones. But he noticed the hesitation in her voice, the way her fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel when she spoke of work. He watched her quietly, as though weighing something deeper than her words. There was no pity in his gaze, only quiet understanding. When she turned onto a tree-lined street, the houses grew larger, manicured lawns stretching wide behind iron gates. She slowed before a modest but elegant home set back from the road, warm porch lights glowing against the storm. Before stepping out, he paused and looked at her steadily. "You have a good heart," he said. "The world still needs people like you." Sarah hurried around the car and moved to his side before he could protest. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, but the wind still tugged at his coat as she gently supported his arm. His grip was light yet steady, his cane tapping carefully against the stone pathway that led to the front door. The house looked even more elegant up close, simple, well-kept, with warm golden light glowing behind tall windows. At the door, he paused and turned toward her. "Please," he said kindly, "come inside and dry off. You must be freezing." She shook her head with a polite smile. "My son's waiting for me. I should get home." He studied her face for a moment, as though committing it to memory. "Your name?" he asked softly.
Sarah.
"Sarah Mitchell." He repeated it slowly. "Sarah Mitchell." The way he said it felt deliberate, careful, as if the syllables mattered. She wished him a good night, then hurried back to her car, unaware of the way he stood there watching until her headlights disappeared down the street. By the time she reached home, the storm had nearly passed. Liam ran into her arms, asking why she was late. She told him about the old man in the rain and how no one else had stopped. His small face lit up with pride. "You did the right thing, Mom," he said. Later that night, after Liam fell asleep, Sarah sat at the kitchen table staring at the unopened eviction notice. Kindness didn't pay rent, she thought quietly. The next morning, just after sunrise, there was a firm knock at her door. The knock came again, firmer this time, echoing through the small apartment. Sarah wiped her hands nervously on her jeans before opening the door. Two men stood outside, both dressed in dark, perfectly tailored suits that looked out of place against the peeling paint of her doorway. One held a leather folder tucked neatly under his arm. The other offered a polite but unreadable expression. "Miss Sarah Mitchell?" the taller man asked. Her stomach tightened. "Yes." "May we have a moment of your time?" 1,000 fears rushed through her mind at once. Had something happened at Liam's school? Was this about unpaid rent? Her voice felt small. Is something wrong?" The shorter man glanced at his colleague before speaking carefully. "We're here regarding an elderly gentleman you assisted last evening. You offered him a ride during the storm." Her heart skipped. The old man. "Yes," she whispered. "Is he all right?" There was a brief silence that seemed to stretch endlessly between them. "I'm afraid he passed away peacefully last night," the taller man said gently. The words hit her harder than she expected. She stepped back slightly, gripping the edge of the door for support. "Passed away?" she repeated, her voice barely audible. She had only known him for a short drive, yet the thought of him alone in that large house unsettled her deeply. Was he in pain? No, the man assured her. It was calm. He was at home. A strange ache filled her chest, grief mixed with something she couldn't quite name. She hadn't even asked his name. Then the shorter man opened the leather folder. "Before his passing," he continued, "he spoke about you." She blinked in confusion. "About me?" He gave very specific instructions. "Concerning you." The air seemed to thicken around her. Instructions? Why would he mention her at all? She felt suddenly exposed, unsure whether to be afraid or defensive. "I don't understand," she said softly. "I only gave him a ride." The two men exchanged another measured look. "There is more you need to know," the taller one said carefully. And in that suspended moment, standing in the doorway of her small apartment, Sarah felt her world begin to shift beneath her feet. The taller man drew a slow breath before speaking. The gentleman you assisted was Mr. Harold Whitmore. The name meant nothing to Sarah. She shook her head faintly. He was the founder and former CEO of Whitmore Industries, the shorter man continued. A multinational manufacturing company. He retired several years ago, but remained majority shareholder. Sarah stared at them, certain she had misheard. That elegant house suddenly made sense in a way that unsettled her. I don't understand, she said again. Mr. Whitmore built his company from nothing, the taller man explained. He started with a single warehouse and one delivery truck. Over decades, he expanded it into a global enterprise. However, in recent years, he lived rather privately. He had children, but they became distant. There were disagreements. He often felt isolated. The shorter man glanced down at the open folder. In the last few years, he developed an unusual habit. He would occasionally dismiss his driver and walk alone in public places. He believed that kindness revealed character. He wanted to see who would help him when there was nothing to gain. Sarah felt her breath catch. Last evening, the man continued, he had attended a charity gala. Instead of returning home directly, he instructed his driver to let him out several streets away. He chose to walk in the storm. She remembered the rain, the cars passing without slowing. You were the only person who stopped, the taller man said quietly. Silence filled the doorway. Sarah's mind replayed the moment she had hesitated at the intersection. In his final statement, the shorter man went on, his voice softening. He referred to you as the kindest stranger I ever met. Her eyes widened, tears threatening to rise without warning. He amended his will months ago to include provisions for someone who demonstrated genuine compassion without knowing his identity, the taller man said. After last night, he instructed his attorney to finalize those provisions in your name. My name, she whispered. He has left you a substantial financial gift, the man said carefully, and a minority ownership stake in Whitmore Industries. The words felt unreal, floating somewhere above her head. Ownership? Financial gift? It sounded like something from television, not her small, struggling life. There must be some mistake, Sarah said quickly, shaking her head. I just gave him a ride. Anyone would have done that. The two men exchanged a solemn look. No, the taller one replied gently. Anyone could have. But only you did. After the men left, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table in stunned silence. The room felt too quiet, too ordinary for the kind of news she had just received. A wealthy businessman. Ownership. Money that could erase every unpaid bill stacked in her drawer. And yet, instead of relief, a heavy guilt pressed against her chest. A man had died. The thought circled endlessly in her mind. How could she accept anything tied to someone's final breath? It felt wrong to benefit from a loss, even if she had nothing to do with it. She had only offered a ride. That was it. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing heroic. She questioned herself relentlessly. Did she deserve this? There were nurses, teachers, volunteers, people who dedicated their lives to service. She was just a tired mother driving home in the rain. What made her worthy of such a gift? Then fear crept in. What if this became public? What if strangers judged her, accused her of manipulation? The idea of cameras, headlines, and whispered suspicions made her stomach twist. She had spent years trying to stay invisible, just surviving quietly. This kind of attention could change everything. Her thoughts drifted back to her father standing in the snow years ago, wiping grease-stained hands on his jacket after helping a stranded driver. She could almost hear his steady voice. Kindness always returns, maybe not from the same hands. At the time, she had believed it was just a comforting phrase. Liam padded into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Mom, are you okay? She pulled him close and tried to explain in simple words. He listened carefully, then looked up at her with the straightforward wisdom only children possess. Mom, he said softly, you helped him because you're good. Not for money. That's why it matters. Something shifted inside her then. Not pride, not greed, but understanding. Maybe this wasn't about reward. Maybe it was about trust. The story broke faster than she expected. Within days, local news stations were running headlines about the mystery woman who inherited part of a business empire after a single act of kindness. Reporters parked outside her apartment complex, cameras flashing whenever she stepped outside. Strangers whispered. Some smiled in admiration, but others didn't. Then came the statements from distant relatives of Mr. Whitmore. Nieces and nephews she had never heard of appeared on television, questioning the legitimacy of the will. They implied manipulation without saying the word outright. They suggested vulnerability, influence, and opportunism. Each accusation, even carefully phrased, felt like a stain spreading across her name. Online criticism followed quickly. Comment sections filled with suspicion. People who didn't know her life, her struggles, or that stormy night formed sharp opinions behind glowing screens. Some claimed it was a setup. Others insisted no one gives away wealth to a stranger without reason. The pressure became suffocating. Sarah considered walking away from it all. She told the lawyers she didn't want conflict, didn't want attention. "Maybe it's better if I refuse," she said, her voice tired. "I never asked for this." But the legal team remained firm. The documentation was thorough. Mr. Whitmore had amended his will clearly and repeatedly. There was recorded testimony, written statements, and witnesses. Everything was airtight. No coercion. No ambiguity. Still, doubt lingered until one afternoon she reread the letter he had left behind. It wasn't about money. It was about intention. For the first time, she realized that rejecting the inheritance wouldn't erase the controversy. It would only erase the purpose behind his decision. Instead of running from the noise, she chose something harder. She chose to stand in it and honor the man who believed her kindness meant something. A few days later, as the media frenzy began to quiet, Sarah returned to the folder the lawyers had given her. Nestled between legal documents was a small envelope, cream-colored, sealed with a wax imprint. Her hands trembled as she broke it open. Inside was a letter, the handwriting precise and deliberate, every stroke carrying a quiet dignity. "Dear Sarah," it began, "wealth is meaningless without kindness. Money alone can't heal wounds, comfort the lonely, or restore hope. It is only useful when paired with a heart willing to give without expectation." She paused, feeling a lump in her throat. Each word seemed to reach directly into her soul, echoing her father's old advice yet speaking in a way that only a stranger who had truly observed her could. He continued, "You reminded me of my late wife, gentle, steadfast, and compassionate. I trusted you because you did not know who I was. You did not seek recognition or reward. That is rare in the world today." Tears welled up as she read the words again, realizing the depth of his observation. He had seen her struggle, her exhaustion, her quiet sacrifices, yet had chosen to acknowledge her humanity above all else. "Use this gift wisely," the letter concluded, "and never forget that your actions ripple outward. Continue to show kindness. Help those who cannot repay you. The world needs people like you." Sarah folded the letter slowly, her hands shaking. She pressed it to her chest, feeling the warmth of a connection that transcended distance, wealth, and circumstance. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry, not from fear, not from stress, but from the overwhelming realization that her small, ordinary act had mattered in a profound way. A stranger had seen her heart, recognized it, and trusted her to carry that trust forward. In that moment, Sarah understood. The true gift was never the money, it was the reminder that compassion can change lives, starting with her own. With the gift from Mr. Whitmore finally secured, Sarah began to take control of the life that had felt so fragile for so long. First, she paid off every overdue bill, cleared the eviction notices, and settled the debts that had weighed on her for months. The relief was almost dizzying. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of breathing space, a rare luxury she had long forgotten. Next came the move. She found a modest, safer home in a quiet neighborhood where Liam could play without worry. The walls were brighter, the rooms larger, and the air carried the promise of new beginnings. Unpacking boxes, she imagined the life she and her son could build here, a life with room for laughter, hope, and dreams that weren't constantly measured against survival. But Sarah did not let the wealth change her purpose. Inspired by the lessons in Mr. Whitmore's letter, she started a small foundation in his name to help elderly people who are alone, struggling, or in need of a little compassion. The work grounded her and gave her a sense of meaning beyond her own struggles. She also made a point to teach Liam about legacy, not in terms of money, but in kindness. Every visit to the elderly, every act of generosity, became a lesson in how small gestures could ripple outward and touch lives. And in her new living room, she placed Mr. Whitmore's cane carefully against the wall, a simple but profound reminder that even the smallest act of compassion could change a life forever. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a sense of peace. She had survived, yes, but more importantly, she had thrived. The memory of that stormy night lingered in Sarah's mind like a vivid painting, rain cascading from dark clouds, the wind tugging at her coat, and the soft tapping of a cane against wet pavement. She could still see Mr. Whitmore's frail figure, trembling yet dignified, standing alone as cars swerved past him without a second glance. It had seemed like a small, almost inconsequential moment at the time. A decision made in seconds, prompted by instinct and compassion rather than thought or expectation. And yet, that single act had set off a chain of events that neither of them could have predicted. Now, standing in the bright morning light of her new home, the world felt completely different. The sun poured through open windows, casting warmth across freshly painted walls. Liam's laughter echoed down the hall as he played in the yard, free from the anxiety and fear that had so often shadowed their lives. The contrast between that stormy night and this sunlit morning was striking, almost surreal. She realized how profoundly small acts of kindness could ripple outward, changing lives in ways that were invisible until the results unfolded. The world had ignored him, she thought, but she hadn't. One choice, one brief decision, had transformed both their paths. It was a lesson in integrity, in doing what is right even when no one is watching. It wasn't just about the inheritance, the new home, or the foundation she had started. It was about recognizing the unseen rewards of compassion, the way true goodness can reverberate quietly yet powerfully through lives touched by it. Sarah looked at Mr. Whitmore's cane in the corner of her living room, a simple artifact of a night she would never forget. A small gesture had led to profound consequences, a reminder that life often measures our character in the moments we think will go unnoticed. And as she held Liam close that evening, she whispered softly, thinking back to that rainy night, "Sometimes the smallest seed in your car makes the biggest space in your destiny."